Ask the Podcast Coach is recorded in front of a live chat room.
This podcast is part of the Power of Podcasting Network. Find it at powerofpodcasting.com. Changing the world, one download at a time.
Ask the Podcast Coach for February 1st, 2020.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means it's Saturday morning. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm your host, Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com. If you'd like to come join us, we're over at askthepodcastcoach.com/live. Or if you want to join in, just go to askthepodcastcoach.com/join, and you will show up right here on the screen with myself and that guy right over there. You know him, you love him. Don't be fooled by cheap imitations. The one, the only, Jim Collison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. Apparently, this podcast sponsored by Craftsman. I didn't get my toolbox. I didn't get my tools out of the way before the show. Good to be back, and happy Saturday morning to you. Apparently, a spotty February for us, I think, with your travels and my stuff, and get hip at Gallup. So we got a busy February. Be patient with us as we get back into March. Everything will return back to normal.
Yeah, I am gone the next 3 weeks. I'm in San Francisco next week for my birthday. The following week after that, I am at Podcast Evolutions. And then the week after that, I am at the Spark Christian Conference in Houston. So, but we'll be back. Are you back on the 29th? Are you available?
No, I think I am. Yeah. I think
okay.
I am. Yeah.
So in theory, we should be back on the 29th with
a little bit of a hiatus of sort.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what to maybe put some things in the feed between now and then, or whatever. Maybe I'll take some of the post show that the public has never heard and work those into an episode in a way. We'll figure something out. But, Jim, you've been out traveling and doing all sorts of fun stuff. So,
well, not actually traveling, but we did at Gallup this week. We did what we call our Gallup Learning Series, and it's a seven-part series. We did 3 podcasts on Tuesday, 1 on Wednesday, 3 on Thursday. Invited everybody we knew, and we got about 2,300 people to register, which we use Eventbrite for. We'll maybe talk about that a little bit later. And, the live numbers, it's really, really interesting, I think, for this audience, as we think about live versus who actually registers. If you ever do a registered event or you ever get anybody to sign up for anything, typically, and I'll ask you, what kind of percentage do you think of those people actually show up that register? So you get 1,000 to register. How many show up live?
You said it's a free event?
It's free. Yep. It's free.
I'm going to say 1%.
1%. So we do pretty well in that area, a little more than 1, but you'd think more than 50, and it's not. It's like 30. It's like
really?
30%. Yeah, pretty consistent for us. If I get somewhere between 30 and 50%, which you think, why would you register and then not show up to that volume? But it's true. It's just I've been doing live. Go ahead.
This is a live event on the internet. Like a webinar? Or?
Yeah, like a webinar, webcast, live on YouTube.
Because I was talking to some people a couple weeks ago, and they were saying how they do these. Because I have a webinar coming up, and they said a lot of people just sign up to get the replay.
Yeah. Yep. No, right on. That's a very valid point. Like, hey, I'm just going to get it. I'm going to put it on my calendar. I'm going to go watch it later. Which the numbers may work out because the very first session we had 400 live, which is pretty great. I don't do that many shows, right? I get 400 live, couple lessons learned from 400. It decreased a little bit as it went along, but not too much. By the end of the week, we were doing maybe 250 live, which was pretty good. But there's a couple things we learned in that by doing it. One is you get anything over 100 live and the chat room gets a little unruly. Like because it's just like this. We use Google, we use YouTube. I'm doing it just like this. Chat room gets a little unruly. And so you gotta have kind of methods. I think next year I'm gonna try and get more people to help me in the chat room from Gallup, not just me. And in the programs that we had where I had people from Gallup, that was actually super helpful to do. So it's just kind of a rush. It's a great way to meet your customers. It's an awesome way to get engagement. The YouTube numbers then double or tripled in the 24 hours preceding the program. So to your point about people watching it later, we do 300 live. I'd come in the next morning and look at yesterday's numbers, and those YouTube numbers would have gone to 900 or 1,000. Which,
Wow.
yeah, I think your instincts are right. People go back and watch those a little bit later. We got tons of positive feedback on it through our Facebook groups. People saying, "Oh, I really appreciated that. Best year ever. Thanks for doing that." Yeah, it's 7 hours plus probably a couple hundred hours of work of all various resources and scheduling and getting people to come on and resources to come and speak and pre-shows and prep, right? You think about all the things.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is a lot of work. But it does create really good engagement. And it's one of those things I think I'm most proud of for Gallup for doing for their customers. I don't know a lot of organizations that would put those kind of resources into that small of a target group and really kind of pull out all the stops for it. So it's always a great week. We do it once a year, opposite our summit. We have this summer summit where people come out and join us live for a in-person event, but super fun and really I learned a lot. Every year I kind of learn a lot about, okay, we stepped it up. By the way, that 2,300 registration number was double what we did last year. So that was another.
It's a whole lot of people.
It is. Yeah. That group, it's interesting. The target audience didn't grow that much. Last year, that target audience was about 7,000, and we got about 1,000 of them to come. This year, that target audience, about 8,000. We got 2,300 to come. So we're starting to do some okay, what did we do different, and how do we approach this, and why? What's going on? I think Eventbrite's kind of some of the key to that. But yeah, pretty cool. Kate, coming off of a week like that. Now, I did 7 hours of podcasting.
I was going to say you mentioned 7 hours, and I was like, wait, what?
With a half an hour pre and a half an hour post. And the post was a private debrief where we would debrief with the teams, like how to go, what'd you think, some of those. So everyone was 2, so that's 14 hours of work. It was coming in early, so one of them kicked off 7 a.m. Central Tuesday and Thursday. So of course I'd have to be in at 6, which should mean I have to be up at 4:30.
Yeah, I was like,
and then we do a 7 a.m. a 7 a.m., a 1 Central, a 7 p.m. Central, all in the same day. So 3, trying to capture those time zones, right?
Is it the same presentation, just multiple? No, it's different stuff.
Completely different.
Yeah.
Gary, time zones.
Gary in the chat room says he's seeing about 30%.
Yep. Yeah.
And then,
good number.
And so you're just using StreamYard, right? Because
Correct.
He uses WebEx.
We find StreamYard super easy with YouTube.
Yeah. I'm doing something just for the registration. Maybe that's where you're using Eventbrite. I use Zoom for all of my coaching stuff, things like that. Love Zoom. And I just decided just to kick the tires on webinars. So I bought their webinar package, which I want to say is an extra $30 or something like that. 40. Yeah, I think it's 40.
It's $40.
And if you go to schoolofpodcasting.com/webinars with an S, that'll take you there. I'm doing a webinar. What I'm going to do is take the things that are stopping people. Like I did that survey, kind of looked at a bunch of Facebook groups, and I'm going to do one on okay, I don't understand gear and technology and that whole thing. And I'm just going to go, all right, why? Here's a mixer. Here's a USB interface. Here's a microphone. Here's this, here's that. Here's Squadcast. Let's just talk about what all these do. And now just kind of turn it over to the audience and go, what are you doing? Okay, I have me and a guest host, me and a guy in the same room, need to interview people on the internet. Okay, so you need an interface and you need Squadcast, and just kind of, this is that whole 9 yards. So what are you using? So Eventbrite then is...
So with using StreamYard and YouTube, you don't get the analytics that you should. If you use WebEx or Webinar or whatever you're using, or Zoom, you get some pretty decent analytics on the backside of who came and how long and where they stayed and those things. We don't necessarily, we don't care. I prefer an easier of use system. Anytime you introduce a login, you got to have somebody dedicated full-time 30 minutes before and 30 minutes after you start only handling login questions. You have to provide tech support because people have trouble logging in and they can't do this and they can't do that. And the browser doesn't work and blah, blah, blah. So I just prefer to go easy peasy YouTube. And even with YouTube, I still have a handful of emails that I get that morning. I can't get logged in. I can't find it. I'm getting blocked, right? I can't find the chat room, some of those kinds of things that come in. But we use Eventbrite to kind of invite everybody to this event and get them signed up. You capture their email address. You can communicate with them that way.
Yeah.
Eventbrite has a couple features, I think, for podcasters that are really, really helpful. One is the follow feature, right? So if you have an account over there and you create an event, or you have regular events, people can follow you. And the emails that Eventbrite sends, Dave, are awesome. Like, so I create a new event. If you're following me, you get an email branded, looks great, and it says, hey, in this case, Gallup has a new event that you might be interested in, and it shows the event I just scheduled, and it goes out to anybody who's following me. They've opted into it. It's their permissions. Like, it's you don't have to worry about it going to a spam filter. Like, it's pretty great, right? So you get that, and then at the bottom it says, here's some upcoming ones. Like, here's some upcoming ones that are coming up. Those are always the 3 most recent, or the ones that are coming up the soonest, right? So I've gotten on this regular cadence of posting new events about 2 months before they happen at Gallup. So 1 at a time, 1 per day, only 3 per week. I don't want to overload them with too many emails, right? And then they get that and they're like, oh, hey, this is happening 2 months ago, but this is happening this week. And within an hour, I get 30 to 60 signups every time I send out an email.
Interesting.
And and it's like, it got me thinking, like, should I be doing this for Home Gadget Geeks? Like, that's typically not what you would think of Eventbrite for, those kinds of things. But we're live every Thursday. Why wouldn't I give my folks an opportunity to use the Eventbrite calendar to kind of keep up to date? I could put the guest information in there. They can put a calendar thing on there. I've been monkeying with the calendar functionality inside WordPress, and all the calendar plugins, a little sketchy. You know, you're kind of, and then of course, it's a paid model right away. You're like, oh, hey, you want titles? Oh no, you're gonna have to pay for those. And you're like, it's a basic thing of an event, Oh, you want it at a time? Okay, so Eventbrite has that. So that is one thing we learned, of kind of consistent communication. You can also, in the event, I would send them a 2-day and a 1-hour reminder of like, hey, we're going live in an hour. I think that going live in an hour changes things, because 2 days out, okay, I kind of remember, but an hour out, I think you have a good chance of actually grabbing somebody in there to say, oh yeah, I better get logged in.
Better get ready.
Better remember this. I knew it worked because an hour before I would see 25 people hit the chat room, right? Because they got the reminder, and then they're like, oh, I need to go over there. Oh, it's in an hour. So I know that email is working. Again, that may be another thing, right? It's like,
to do that.
Yeah. And then a post, I don't think it's a bad idea. We do a post-show follow-up email to them through Eventbrite that says, hey, because only 30% join you, many of them may even forget they signed up. And so a post-show, like, hey, we did it. Here's the link to the show. Yeah. You can watch or whatever. By the way, you can do a ton of marketing inside those emails, right?
Have you ever used Facebook events?
No.
Me neither. I saw that and I was like, I don't know how much it reminds anybody, or you know what I mean? It's one of those things like, I could put it there, but is it really going to do anything? Fred had a question in here. I saw a tutorial on Zoom and it really looked too complicated. It's if you're used to Zoom meetings, it's not a whole lot different. You just go in, you add your logo, a little branding. For me, I loved it because when you sign up, it's gonna ask you, do you have a podcast? Like, I want to know who my audience is. So I'm gonna get that information from the registrants so I can see who I'm talking to. Then you put, where do you want them to go when the webinar is over? Which is great, because if you're promoting a product, you just go, hey, thanks so much. When they go, and I'm leaving, boom, your stuff goes in front of them. And kind of what Jim was talking about, how often do you want to remind them that the webinar is coming on? Do you want an hourly, the day before, a week before, all that other stuff? So there's a lot of, but what's great is I went through and I set it up, and then I said, save this as a template. Mm-hmm. So now the next time I do that, I just bring it up, change the information about the webinar, and there you go. So
Eventbrite has templates too that work really, really well. They're also very motivated to have their mobile game together. So all their stuff looks just as good on mobile as it does on the web. So it's if you're interested in seeing how we're using it at Gallup, and I'm scheduled 90 days out, so you can kind of see a whole bunch of events. Go to gallup.eventbrite.com. We also got a vanity URL, which is pretty cool. Gallup.eventbrite.com. And you can kind of see how I've structured the events. We're now using kind of branded and pictured album art like you would use on YouTube. We're using that on Eventbrite because we're finding, that people like to see other people's faces.
Who owns Eventbrite?
I don't know. It's a really good question.
Because it's one of those things that's been around forever, and it's just slowly eked in front of everybody and hasn't, I know there's like Brown Bag something. There's another ticketing service. But it seems like everybody just goes back to Eventbrite, and they're not super. It's kind of like PayPal. They take a chunk of the ticket, like any other ticket. When it's paid,
you can do free events for free. That's the great thing I think right now about Eventbrite is they've never cranked down on their free plan. And so if you have free events like a podcast and you just want people to come out live, it's a great way to organize. Those.
Yeah. I like it. Speaking of events, if you're looking for podcasting events, plug my own stuff, might as well. Podcastingevents.net is a website I put together quickly. Speaking of horrible calendar tools, it's okay. Of course, James Cridlin in true, Daniel J. Lewis, James Cridlin, both those guys are big geeks under the hood. And James is pulling the RSS feed, and it turns out that some of the data isn't in the feed, and he's like, hey, can you hack that thing? And I'm like, I'm not I don't write code. Fred in the chat room is saying, did you hear that Podcast Movement 2020 in LA now has a new ticket, one that is only for exhibits and keynotes? He says shades of the pass of the free pass for the old New Media Expo. So that's they're just trying to get it's smart because it gets your sponsors some people, in theory. So, and what's interesting about that, if you listen to Dan on the New Media Show, that was not supposed to be as podcasting 101-ish as ones in the past. And they had, talk about listening to your audience. They had people that said, no, where's like the podcasting 101 stuff? So I'll actually be speaking some podcasting 101 stuff at that. So I'm looking forward. It's going to be fun. I love going to a first time of anything, because it's nice to look back and go, I remember when it was just this wee little thing. So
Dan's got his stuff together, man. That guy, that I listened to that whole interview he did with Rob and Todd, and he's just, those guys are just doing it right. I mean, I'm sure there's things going wrong, but they're getting more right than they're getting wrong. And it'll be fun to see how this transition conference goes here in a couple of weeks. And if it's viable for them, I don't think they know yet. They're kind of like, I don't know if this is going to happen again. Let's just see how it goes. And I like that approach of the kind of pivoting a little bit, listening to the feedback. Like I think people have been saying, it'd be great to have more of these. Yeah, I forget the. It might have been Podlords. Jared was on and explained after year 2, and this was the year that they like just worked year round and promoted and blah 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 blah, and they were like thousands of dollars in debt. Like they told, like, how'd you like to like just keep telling your wife, honey, it's okay, but at the end of this, we're going to be rich. I'm sorry, I'm going to miss so-and-so, but that's all right. We're good. And you get done. You're like, we're like, it didn't work.
It was like, it was like, we're $6,000, $20,000. It was a lot of money, whatever it was. And I was like, holy shnikes, that's gotta, so the next time I see Jared's wife, I'm going to be like, you're a saint. Cause I would have been like, all right, enough of this podcast crap, so it'll be fun. I'm looking forward to seeing it. Looking forward to going to San Francisco. I did find out, do we care about flight horror stories?
No.
It's a good thing and a bad thing. I had a flight.
We got the coronavirus going around right now, so why not add it in?
I had a flight from Cleveland to San Francisco and San Francisco back to Cleveland. And then it dawned on me, I'm going to be home for a day before I turn around and fly to Los Angeles. So I do a lot of my stuff through Travelocity. I'm like, how much is it to change my ticket? They're like $200. I'm like, that's stupid. It's because the flight from San Francisco to Burbank is $59. I'm like, all right, I guess I'm eating half that ticket. So I book a one-way ticket from San Francisco to LA, and then I book a one-way ticket from LA to Cleveland to get me home.
Okay.
They keep canceling my ticket. And I'm like, why are they doing this? Because their system is trying to figure out how I'm going to be on two planes at once. It took a while to figure it out, but it was like, and I'll give Travelocity credit. They finally called the airline for me and said, look, this guy's, because at that point I had 3 tickets that I bought, and it was quite the pain in the butt.
That's probably an anti-terrorist thing, right? Where you're buying tickets, it's obviously your ID.
Yeah.
So that is when you're planning that kind of travel. That is, and you got to be careful. One time I booked Omaha to Portland to Seattle to be at a Microsoft MVP, but I wanted to take the train on the way home. I wanted to take the train from Seattle back to Portland, spend some time with my sister, and then grab the plane back. So I was just going to skip the leg. Like I thought, well, okay, I'll just show up in Portland and jump on the plane. No, if you miss the first leg, they cancel everything. So I didn't, so I was like, oh, well, I guess so. I had to go. I think I went because I was planning to be in Portland for a couple of days. So I think I went down to Portland and then I went back to Seattle, got on the plane, flew back to Portland, and then flew home. It's just the weird travel stuff that we do for safety.
You're getting praise here. Jim's Gallup Eventbrite page looks awesome. So
thanks.
Do they give you a lot of room to?
They do. They do. They're big art,
and
it looks good, and it's clean, and there's very few restrictions on title length. And again, gallup.eventbrite.com. A big graphic that you can put up front. If your events are free, it's free, which is great.
Nice.
I think it's a great. I tried this maybe 4 years ago with Eventbrite, where I started doing my podcast. I started putting the podcast out there. I am not really good at regularly updating those things. But now that I do it for work, we weren't using it as much at work. Now that I use it at work, maybe I'll be a little more inclined. But that may be, again, one of those things sometimes people want the calendar invite, right? So they register for the event, they get the iCal, download it, put it in Outlook or whatever, right? To be able to do that. And that just gives them all the options. The power is in following. No doubt. You want your listeners to follow you, so you have the right to advertise to them when you have new events coming up. And so we've done a big push second half of last year and in this year to get them to subscribe on YouTube and follow us on Eventbrite. I don't hear a lot of podcasters saying that. So that may be right. That may be one of those. It's been incredibly powerful for us to use Eventbrite in that way. Now we have a very professional audience. They're used to this. Right. It may work well in that, but maybe that's your audience too.
Did you get the new email from Apple?
Which one?
The one that kind of just gives examples of how to use. Well, I can just read it if you want.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Dear podcast creator, below are some updates to help improve the experience for your listeners on Apple Podcast show availability and content updates. Apple routinely checks each podcast RSS feed to detect new episodes, as well as metadata or artwork changes. Our system will display the changes on Apple Podcasts within 24 hours after detecting them. So again, when you change something in Apple, it's going to take a day for it to show up. It's a mirror of whatever you're using to make your feed. You don't need to perform additional actions. Simply confirm the new episode or content updates are successfully published on your hosting provider's platform. And after 24 hours, if your new episode or content updates don't appear on Apple Podcasts, sign into Podcast Connect and follow these steps. So they're saying, look, if it's been 24 hours and your episode isn't showing up, here's what you can do. But notice that is the criteria if it's been more than 24 hours. All right. So continuing on. Click my podcast, check the status section to confirm your show is active. So if your feed is, invalid or something and they've turned it off, you'll see that there. It says if your show is in a failed validation status, troubleshoot the issue and resubmit your feed. Check the time and date when your show was last refreshed. For artwork changes, make sure the new image file has a different file name than the previous one. So if they have something like logo.jpg, make your new file, logo2.jpg, and then meets the artwork requirements. And this is the one that killed me. If you've confirmed the above items, so your feed's valid, it's been refreshed and it's still not there, And it's been more than 24 hours. So again, they keep hitting this 24 hours since your podcast was last refreshed. Select refresh feed. Podcast Connect will schedule an update. Please allow up to, Jim, want to guess?
24 hours.
24 hours for this process to complete. Note, don't refresh your show with every new episode or RSS feed edit. I'm going to repeat that again. Don't refresh your show with every new episode or RSS feed edit. Now, why am I saying that? Because there used to be a way to ping Apple, and everybody pinged it all the time, 24/7, and they took it away. So if everybody goes in and just refreshes all the time, they're going to take this away.
Relax, people.
Yeah.
Relax.
Fundamentals of podcast marketing. So now we get to learn how to market from Apple. When marketing your show, it's helpful to keep in mind why and how people listen to podcasts. Learn more about podcast marketing fundamentals, which include tips and tools to help grow your audience. For example, you can learn how to build and grow your show's brand, write effective marketing copy describing your show. So again, I always tell people, you need to explain what to expect and who's the show for. Then it says leverage social media to build your audience. To me, I just want to go, duh. Use the Listen on Apple Podcast badge to promote your show or episode, or collaborate with other podcast creators to generate buzz for your own show. Regards, the Apple Podcast team.
In other words, don't rely so much on us.
Kinda. And it's just
relax, people.
Yeah, I get that every day. I just released my episode.
Yeah.
And it's not, I get it's not anywhere. And then I also get a bunch about Apple. And the other thing, the thing that killed me is they didn't mention in that thing when it said meet Apple specs. I want Apple so badly to put in their specs, your file size should be less than 500 kilobytes. It's this weird unwritten rule. We all know it, but they never publicize that. Yeah. And yet when I see problems with shows not updating, it's because their artwork is 2.8 megs. And I'm like, yeah, you're 4 times over your limit. So, but the other one is, if you're looking at Apple Podcasts and your links don't work, like your links don't even show up, like you have links in your show notes, and also your show notes are one giant paragraph, you have done a search for your show and you found it, but you didn't subscribe. And that drives me nuts, that the show notes look different if you subscribe versus if you're, and I have videos that I send to people. I'm like, look, here's an example. And they go, oh, that's really stupid. And I go, yep. Send your email to Steve Jobs because that's where it's going. So, but yeah, people do panic after 24 hours, and
they do. It does cry that I think we actually need a little bit better of a system than we have. Like, Rob and Todd have been talking about a new RSS spec of some kind, and it does kind of feel a little 2003-ish. Sometimes RSS, you're kind of like. And it's funny. RSS has been around a long time. Nobody knows what it is. when I talk to people about podcasting, and I'm like, so RSS, right? And they're like,
no.
You're like, no. So it's I think we need to blow the system up and do something different.
It's so weird because when blogging was when blogging ruled the world, everybody knew RSS.
Yeah. Well, bloggers for sure. Yeah, but
there was
they knew readers.
Yeah,
right? People who
readers.
were using that to read.
There were a ton. Yeah. Kyle in the chat room says proof that time is relative. Time seems to stand still between when you hit publish and when it shows up in Apple. The other thing that I'm starting to see, and I'm kind of like, really? It's like, look, I had this scheduled to release at 5 a.m. and I'm showing it came out at 5:08. And I'm like, it's not radio. Like, nobody's waiting at 5 a.m. I shouldn't say nobody, but I just like, people are really getting, and that's the stuff that I see people spend literally, it sounds like hours, like really, like I am mesmerized on the fact that this came out 4 minutes later than it was supposed to. And I'm like, this is what you're going to spend. You have only so much energy and only so much time. This is how you're going to grow your audience, by making sure it comes out exactly. And I was just like, wow, okay. So it's a little different when I see that.
I can't remember the last time I actually looked or even cared. I don't publish mine on a time schedule. When it's ready, I publish it. Last night, it was Friday night. We did the show on Wednesday, so I had extra time. So I got it done Friday night. I just published it. Sometimes it's Saturday morning. Sometimes it's Sunday. I've never had audience. Now, maybe I've lost people over this, but I've never had any of my audience say, hey, would you publish that on a more consistent basis? Generally, my listeners, I don't know about yours, Dave, but mine are episode or 2 or 5 behind.
Yeah.
They don't care. They're still just trying to catch up.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, Monday mornings when I get in my car, I do expect to see school podcasting there. Like
right.
that, you know.
But here's the thing: Monday morning, you're not waiting for it at midnight on Sunday.
I'm not refresh.
Yeah, because that's when it comes out. It comes out Sunday at midnight, which is basically Monday morning. And there are times when it comes out at 12:15, 12:30, 12:45, because Dave was watching football and that whole 9 yards.
Throw Kyle's comment up there if it's shown up in the API yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the big worry is that even if they did their edits and even if they loaded the file right, they still need to make sure that it shows up. It's the right episode, right? Or these especially early podcasters getting that confidence that, like, okay, I did all the right things. And Kyle, you're 100% right. And I'm maybe being a little too insensitive to that aspect of it. That, you kind of want to know, and you're excited, and this is like, you're already nervous that people are going to hear your voice, and so I think that's correct as well. I don't mean to be insensitive to new podcasters. I just don't. I even on my enterprise shows, I don't care. They're going to catch it. Time doesn't matter. Most 90% of my audience, 99% of my audience isn't going to pick it up in the 5 minutes I publish it.
Yeah,
we also, Dave, try to spend a lot of time getting it everywhere. So not just RSS. Not just through podcast players, but making sure they're subscribing to it on YouTube, making sure that it's available as a audio embeddable widget for off of Spreaker, right? Those kinds of things. They can listen to it anywhere at any time in any way.
Well, the other I'm starting to see a small trend where people are trying, how do I get the link to send it to Apple? Like, how do I send them to this episode in Apple Podcasts? I know how to do it in iTunes and stuff, but again, I just want to go, and what about the Android people? And then I thought, well, what if you're getting the link, which I don't even know if you can, in Google Podcasts? I just like the time it would spend. I'm like, just send them to your website with subscribe buttons. Mm-hmm. Like, those don't change. And, if you like this, click here and you can get a whole bunch more for free. It just, again, these are the little things that I see people spending time on. And I'm like, on one hand, I appreciate the fact they're trying to make it easy to get to this episode in whatever platform, but I'm like, do you know how many platforms there are? Like, here's the one for Castbox and here's the one for Stitcher. And it's like, holy schmoly.
So here's what I like to do. When I don't often get someone confused about subscribing. They kind of figure out a way. But when I do, I call them. So that's like, if you ever want to, not many people do, but if you ever want to talk to me in person, just say you're having trouble subscribing and I will call you. Because I want to ask them some questions. And then they're stunned that they get a call. They're like,
right.
What? And then I'm like, okay, well, how do you, what's the easiest way for you to listen to this stuff? And I just help them set it up. Because if they're having that kind of trouble, generally they're going to need somebody to walk through. They're going to give it 7 seconds and they're going to quit.
Right.
And I do not want that. We have to find a way to get these folks who can't figure out how to subscribe. And I know that's not very scalable, but for those ones that can't do it, listen, if they figure out how to do it and you turn them and they love it, those are the ones that tell everybody.
Well, that was going to be my thing. I'm like, my friend, that deserves one of those. Because here's the thing. Number one, you said it. They're going to go, the guy from my phone or the guy from the YouTube is on my phone. They're going to freak out about that. It also shows that I care about my subscribers because I just called you.
Right.
And we talked about this last night on the Podcasters Roundtable. There's still 49% of America that hasn't listened to a podcast.
Right.
And I think we need to, if we're like talking about something and I actually talked about that once on my podcast, we need to start throwing in the phrase, has anyone ever showed you how to listen to a podcast? Because I think we're getting to the point where now it's like, everybody does the podcast thing. There's a big group in the corner that goes, I don't know what a podcast is. Do you know what a podcast is? And
I'm not gonna say anything either.
Yeah. And I'm like, I don't want to sound stupid.
Right.
So I think we need to start doing that. Open the door to like, hey, has anybody ever shown you how to, it's super easy. What kind of phone do you have? And go that route. So,
and they'll tell, not only will they say it, but they'll help their also friends who don't know how to do it. Cause now they know something. They're like, oh, in my circle, I know how to subscribe. and they'll go out and say, hey, have you guys, like, I'm cool. I'm listening to these podcasts. Are you listening to them too? Here, let me show you how to do it. So, you help one and that will help 10. We need more of that in the podcast space. And so it's just, I think we've got to be a little more intentional about helping people.
Yeah. You know who we don't need to explain how to listen to a podcast?
Our awesome subscribers.
That's right. Sure. So we are talking about, he said clicking. Oh, first of all, if you want to be the teacher's pet and need some one-on-one consulting at a deeply discounted rate, go over again, askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome and sign up. But I always like to thank my $20 supporters. We're talking Greg from debtshepherd.com, where he teaches financial wellness. Glenn the Geek Hebert over at horseradionetwork.com. Joshua Rivers at podcastingexperiments.com. And I need to change that. And it's podcast. I'll have to get his new domain. It's podcast guy something, because he's actually kind of, he's doing an experiment with podcasting experience by doing something else. He's doing something else podcasting related. So, but I know he's part of the podcast guy.
Is it Podcast Guy Media?
Yes, I think that's it. Okay. So Max Trescott over at aviationnewstalk.com, Shane at spybrary.com, Carrie Bond. I wonder if she's ever tired of hearing that.
No, I'm sure she never hears that.
Never hears that. keywestperspective.com/podcast. Can you see that? She's going on a date. Who are you going on a date with? Oh, this guy's, I'm dying if his name is James. Nobody would ever name their kid James Bond, would they?
Oh, they would.
Yeah. It's like,
I'm sure it's happened.
Or she's dating Keith and like, I have a brother, Yeah, she says never heard that at all. Carl White over in Life in the Carolinas podcast.com. Kim Craggy, who is in Boston right now. Here's a great example of how podcasting works. I heard Podcasting Step by Step, which is Sarah Michael's podcast, where Matthew Dix was on there. I bought his book, found his podcast, talked about it on my show, and Kim Craggy is now at Matthew Dix's seminar in Boston. So there's the power of podcasting. You can find Kim's show over at Toastmasters101.net. And this is left over from last week. Yeah, I was going to say, it's actually our $1 patrons I want to talk about, because what I'm doing now, Jim, is I pick a group rather than doing everybody. So we're talking Alan Palmer, Adam Higgins at Odd Dad Out podcast, the Audio Dice Network at audiodice.net, Anthony at Route66podcast.com, Barb at anchor.fm/BarbTUSA, Brandon at the Seahawkers podcast.com, Bumble at maskme.org. That's masqme.org. Craig at ingleaspodcast.com. Chris and Brandon at FloridaFocusPodcast.com. Guys, you should reach out to Pod Vader. Jay Soderberg is looking for college sports programs, and that's a huge network. Dave Wilson at Ottawa Works, Dan at Based on a True Story Podcast.com, Dave at thesoccersidelines.com, Ed at SonicCupcake.com, a new patron. Thank you, Ed. I met Ed in when I went to Boston. It was great fun. Emily Prokop at thestorybehindpodcast.com. Garrett at it doesn't. Garrett at utrmedia.org. Gary and Margaret at beekeepingpodcast.com. The International Latin Podcast Awards at latinpodcastawards.com. James at creepykingdom.com. Jeff at, now this one's cute, that's a Z, DisneyCoastToCoast.com. Jason at TV Times 3, and that's spelled out THREE. Jay at PotStirrerPodcast.com. Josh at SoberSpeak.com. Kyle at LevelUpTech.com. Lucas at TriangleTactical.net. Josh at OnTheBubblePodcast.com. Mark at ResourcefulDesigner.com. And if you like the look of the School of Podcasting banner in the upper right-hand corner, that is done by Mark.
Looking good. I like it. I like it a lot.
Mike at CreatePod, a podcast about the art of podcasting. Find that at createpodATX.com. Matt at Blue Ribbon Podcast. Patrick at BigSeancePodcast.com. Paul at fightingthroughpodcast.co.uk. Randall Black at, you guessed it, randallblack.com. Ryle Davis Jr., Steve Sleeper at earn.show. Sean at clarinet.com. Wayne Henderson. You know what? Let's do this. If you need Wayne to do a voiceover, he sounds like this.
Welcome to the Podcast Review Show, hosted by radio veteran Eric K. Johnson from podcasttalentcoach.com and Hall of Fame podcaster Dave Jackson.
Okay. That's the soothing sounds. I did the music, but Wayne did the voiceover. Cody Sison, and last but not least, Zachary Webb at SeriousAboutTech.com. If you would like to be an awesome supporter, simply go over to AskThePodcastCoach.com/awesome. That's really weird. I hit the mic on whatever this thing is called, Backpack Studio. So, because I still have all the sound effects from last week. So that's crazy.
I wasn't quite sure what to do with the last week.
Yeah, that was one where it's like, hey, let's try this and see what happens. And we've learned I will never do that again. So, in fact, I think in the future,
I thought it was creative. I thought it was creative.
It was creative. Yeah, we will give it that. But it was.
You did that live?
I did that live.
Okay. Yeah, it was it was the very first week of my high school program, so I couldn't make it. The gal who was going to cover me, I was going to try and make the show, and the gal who was going to cover me called in, so I couldn't make it. But yeah, that takes a lot of you've talked about that voice in the past and trying to it really grinds on your vocal cords.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh crap, you're doing this for an hour?
No, that's why I was so happy when I think it was Glenn or
was that staged, or did you actually have somebody that magically call in? Did somebody?
No, he just magically called in. And I was like, oh, thank you, God. Yeah. So, yeah.
But here's Dave. Okay, just a tangent. This has nothing to do with podcasting. I'm amazed at your ability to act like two different people and have a conversation because that's when you do this for school podcasting, you have some ability to edit. You did it live, and you were almost like a ventriloquist last week because you had to be you had to be both voices, and you had to work those voices against each other, and that's creative. Like, to me, I could barely think about one person at a time. You had two conversations. You had you and was it Pinky? No, Binky. You had Binky going, and dude, that's some talent. Like
it's a little it's taking advantage of your ADD and using it for good.
Because you're like the character runs away, and you've got to pull the character back.
Right.
And to do that in real time creatively where it sounds real is Dave, that's some real talent. I mean, like if you could turn that character into a puppet and do it, it would be good.
The fun thing is, in my head, Binky's an idiot that is completely politically incorrect and just is kind of lost. Not so much like a madman where he's just sexually abusing people, but just completely, so it's a case of like, so anytime I see something and I'm like, oh, we could be inappropriate here, but not be like offensive in a way, but then again, I could always see somebody going, hey, that you shouldn't say that. I'm like, hey, it wasn't me, man, it was Binky. So, so
the views expressed on this show are not necessarily those of the host or the characters.
That
was really good. I wouldn't want to listen to it every week, so that's just, I think, one of those kinds of things where be careful as you get out of character on your podcast. That's probably unless you get overwhelming, but it was fun. It was fun. I made it through, I don't know, half or 3/4 of it before I ran out of time. But listen, I think it was a risk. Like,
it was one when I was like going, am I really going to do this? And I'm like, it'll either work or we'll have a good story to talk about how people went, wow, that was really bad.
Do you feel like I felt like it amped up your thinking cycles because you were constantly now thinking about two characters instead of one, and you were worried about having enough to keep going, and I felt like that pushed you a little bit faster on your cadence than normal.
The thing that I noticed, number one, when we got done, I was exhausted because it's one thing to be on and run the show and hit the buttons and record, but now I'm doing all this other stuff. When I edited that show, I was an absolute machine. I cut it. I mean, because normally I don't cut them out. I will occasionally maybe, but it was just, and because I'm trying to figure out what to do next. And there wasn't anybody like today while you were talking about Eventbrite. I looked down and I was like, oh crap, I don't have PowerPoint running in the background. So while you're doing that, I'm doing that. So there was nobody to like, hey, talk for 2 minutes while I fix this over here.
Yeah.
And so that was when I listened back, I'm like, I am an machine. And you're right. I was talking a little fast, just everything was amped up just a bit more.
I think you were it's one of those kinds of things where it's a format you're not necessarily used to, and you get excited about it. I know when I have a big guest on, I do the same thing. Like the pitch comes up a little bit, the volume comes up a little bit, the intensity comes up a little bit. And I just felt like you were a little intense, not in a bad way.
Yeah.
It was just a little more intense than normal.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about what you were doing. Like, if I didn't know you, I would have been like, wow, who is this?
Yeah.
Who is this Binky?
Well, the chat room was like, what's happening? What's going on? Yeah.
I didn't look at the video. I only watched the audio.
Yeah.
I should go back and watch the video.
Kyle says Dave Jackson presents Binky the Wizard at Christmas. It's got stockings, man. Ho ho hos. Hey, yeah, it'd be great. So,
see, you can think about the inappropriate when you do Binky, and you're okay saying it. You would never say that out of character, right?
So
that's creative. See, I barely can think as one person, much less two.
Well, roses are red, violets are blue. I'm a schizophrenic, and so am I. So
exactly.
Speaking of Christmas, we got a present. I think it's either today or yesterday. Podcastmagazine.com has put out their inaugural, what you call it? And I'm actually in it, but I'm not in it. That's the other one that I gave them the new logo, and I was talking to Jim pre-show. For some reason, I'm literally grabbing my shirt and pulling my new logo into the reality. It's not, I'm working on a new landing page for the school.
Good.
Yeah.
It's really good. Like, stop worrying about it.
Yeah.
Just release that podcast, Dave Jackson. Just release it.
That's it. And I'm laughing because I'm working on all these other projects, everything but what I should be doing. And I don't know why that is.
It's a really good logo.
Yeah.
It's really, really good.
Yeah, Chris says last week kept us guessing. I didn't know if Ren and Stimpy were next. So, you idiot! Yeah, Red. So, but anyway, here's my question: podcastmagazine.com. It's apparently you can get it on an app. You can read it. It's got this cool thing where you can read it online. What are your thoughts on this? Is it gonna because to me, I'm like,
I think it's a good run. I think there's still a space for this.
I think it's made for the podcast listener. I think that's where I have the disconnect, because I'm looking at it going, where's the podcast about this? Can I just listen to the interviews?
Yeah.
But it's not made, I don't think, for podcasters, even though it's called Podcaster Magazine. No, it isn't. It's Podcast Magazine. There have been other ones. I think there was a Podcaster Magazine. There was Pottertainment. There have been a few.
I just don't know how many people are wondering, I wonder if there's a magazine about podcasting. Like, I don't, that's one of the things, I don't know if that audience is engaged enough yet to be thinking along those lines. Now, if the paper version is great, if that's what they're doing, if they have an electronic version of it, awesome. If they market it properly, maybe there is. I just don't see a market for people wondering like, man, I'd really like to learn more about podcast listening. Well, isn't that just listening to podcasts?
Well, they do have a Hot 50, which is it's a pinup, man. A bunch of dudes that are 50 and they're white. It's a Hot 50. No, but anyway, it's supposed to be a curated list of people. Like, so to me, it's another chart that people can game. Because I was thinking, you know what? Not only is there a magazine about podcasts, is there another chart that we can game? But I'm interested. It looks really well done. When I got interviewed, because I'm in this episode, in this edition, I got interviewed for a long time, and they it's funny because it says how to get banned in 20 minutes by one of podcast OGs, because I told that story about how I found an old this was pre-Facebook, and it was a forum, and I walked in, it was ex-DJs, and I was like, oh, it was very much kind of thing. And I walked in, did an announcement, so just started pimping the school of podcasting, he said, hitting the microphone. And they banned me in 20 minutes. They're like, yeah, who is this spamming fool? Mm-hmm. That's why I always say, know where your audience is, go to where they are, make friends with them. You have to make friends with them.
Yeah.
So, but Fred says, I saw the No Agenda show was number 30, Hot 50. I've not checked out the Hot 50 yet to see does anybody know what number 1 is? I'm going to guess Joe Rogan.
It's good to have him. Leo ripped on Joe this week on
really?
Windows Weekly. Not ripped, but it was kind of a backhanded comment about the three of them, it's Paul Thurrott, Mary Jo Foley, and Leo that do Windows Weekly. And they opened the show, the first 10 minutes, talking about nothing about tech. It was all personal kind of thing. And Leo said, hey, if we were high, we'd have the Joe Rogan show right now.
Nice. Apparently Fred's read this. He goes, I thought the podcast magazine was tuned for a specific audience. I was a bit disappointed and sent some feedback for Steve Olsher. So I have yet to read it yet. Today was the first day I cracked it. And the first thing I had to say is like, okay, how can I get this big enough to where I can read?
They can make it work. Like we want these kinds of things to work. So hopefully they can make it financially viable and sell enough advertising in it. Or it's not subscription, it's free, I'm assuming, right?
It is free. And last I heard we're talking tens of 20s of 30s of thousands of people that are subscribed to that thing. So now it's a matter if they will read it. And Cliff is, wow, I'm like Kreskin, number 1 Joe Rogan experience. There's
a shocker.
There's an actual chart for Ohio. School of Podcasting was number 1 in Ohio.
I think they're being kind to you, Dave.
Well, that's just because I listen to my show all the time. Interesting.
All the good stuff comes out of Ohio. From college football.
Yeah, they're talking about Podcast User Magazine. It did well, good enough. But he said it was a volunteer effort and only a couple people knew how to use desktop editing software. Yeah. News. I have been on many. I was the editor of the student newsletter at Stark State University. And how I got that job is the first year I went to school, I was a writer for the newsletter. And the next year, everybody graduated. And they're like, well, you're the only guy left. You're the editor. And I was like, oh, okay. But I've been involved with many different newsletters. It's always a great idea. And people are like, oh man, I'll contribute until episode or edition number 2. That's when you find out who's really involved. You're like, oh, I have to write another one. You're like, yeah. You're like, how many? Yeah. So that's always kind
Gave
of
it all away in their first one. That's generally, that's another thing podcasters do. In their early podcasts, they give everything away in the first 3 episodes. Everything they've ever known, everything they've ever wanted to say, they just vomit on their audience in the first 3 episodes. And then you're like, oh, what do we say next? You got to hold some of that stuff back. Leave people wondering. Don't, we in a lot of the interviews that I do, especially with some of the pros that we have at Gallup, and maybe they haven't been on the podcast before. And as they prep for it, they prep to say about 15 things. And I'm like, guys, it needs to be like 3, maybe 2. It goes so fast. And when we do a 20-minute episode, really it's like 1.25 things.
Yeah.
Because it just goes too fast. And people, you don't need to drop every little bit of knowledge you've ever known on anybody in the first. When I was going to college, I went to a Christian liberal arts school, and surprisingly, I was going to work in the church. I was going to be a pastor. And I remember I got my first chance to preach at this big church. It had been my home church when I'd been in the military, and I went back and I did like a 48-minute sermon, and it was supposed to be like 20. And that's what I did. I just I worked on this message for like 4 weeks, and it had all these points and all this stuff I wanted to bring in. And in the debrief, the pastor was like, well, you went too long. You said too much. You tried to get too many things. And it's just kind of that lesson. Like, I think sometimes we need to leave people, sometimes these magazines too, like the very first episodes, like you're saying, or the very first print is like 59 pages. And you're like, yeah, I'm not sure everybody's going to get through that much material. Hold some back, hold some stuff back.
Well, that's like when you make a lead magnet for your podcast, or if you're trying to get people on an email list, and people will write War and Peace, and you're like, no, lead magnet should fix one thing that your audience wants. Here's how you do it. Here's the 6 steps. Just do this, that, and that, and your problem is solved. And people are like, no, it's a 15 page. I'm like, I'm not sure that's what people, they want. Yeah. So,
no, right on.
In the chat room, he says, That's one reason when a new podcaster asks, this is based on a true story podcast, ask me for a tip. I suggest they write down a year's worth of episode ideas before starting. A year's a bit much, but I tell you what, that will separate the men from the boys.
It's good exercise.
Yeah, just go through that.
10, right? But
that's what I usually say. 10. Give
10
me
is
10.
a good number, but
and then
a
like,
year is great.
I always love when it's like 10. That's easy, and then you go great, and they get to 6, and they start going, I could, like, no, we need 10.
Oh yeah, I got 10 ideas. Do you? Write them down. Let's see if you do. And you're right. You're right. You get 6 or 7, and you're like, what are those last ones?
Yeah, and that's when you go. And in some cases, I always mention people that look, this doesn't have to be an ongoing thing. If you just want to do a series with 6 episodes, you can do that. We can position that so it sounds like it was planned, as opposed to you just died after episode 6. We'll make it sound like, and this is the last episode. We're going to be talking about such and such, or it could be a season,
We're doing more of those mini series inside of our podcast. So, the podcast just keeps going, but we're right now we're grinding through a 4-part series on teams and managers. And so, hey, it's going to be 4 parts. And in 1, we reference 2, 3, and 4, and 2, we reference 1, 3, and 4, and 3, right? You kind of build them all together as a packet, but that doesn't mean it sits on its own. It still sits in the feed. It's still part of the whole series, but it's a little mini series. I have 4 of those lined up for the first half of the year, these 4-part series on things. And it just kind of helps people, I think, organize like, oh yeah, there was a teams and managers series that's going on. And actually for us, that's the whole umbrella for the year. And then we have various focusing on the manager and some on the teams and some on activities and some of those kinds of things. So it just, I do like the idea even of doing mini series inside of your current podcast feed. Yeah,
absolutely. I did have one quick question. I'm looking down at the clock. It's almost 11:30 already.
Oh, so fast.
This is from Crystal in a Facebook group. She says, any advice on how to keep a conversation going without talking about yourself? I'm sure this seems like a crazy question. My personality is such that I interject personal experiences to relate to my guest. Now I'm worried that I shouldn't be shifting the conversation away from my topic or my guest. What say you? I will let you go first.
Well, what I do, Dave.
Yeah.
It's hard not to. Like, it's hard not to interject, especially as the host, to do this.
Yeah.
And just let your guest do it, because let's take Jim Harold. He's been on before. We've talked about him. He's got Pod Lords. And Jim's got some opinions of some things to say about podcasting, and he has his guests on. He kind of splits that 50-50 with his guest on those, where he interjects some of his wisdom on this, and the guest interjects some of theirs. That's kind of his style, and I kind of like it. I mean, I want to hear from Jim. He's been podcasting forever. I think he's got some things to say. I think it works for Jim in his case. So I think you have to measure. For everybody, it's a little bit different, but I think you have to measure that. Dave, I mean, think in this case, well, I'm on every week and we're hosts, so maybe this is a bad example. On Home Gadget Geeks, I try to get out of the way as much as I can.
Yeah.
They're also listening because they want to hear my take on it, right? So, boy, you got to balance that, I think.
It is. We just, on the podcast review show, it's not out yet. I'm editing it when we get done here. We had a guy on, and it's weird because usually it's the opposite. Most podcasters are kind of introverts. They ask their question. This guy, every time the guest, finished their answer, he went into, we're talking 3-4 minute story about something in his life, to where it was like 60-40. And we kind of went, dude, the good news is you're not shy. The bad news is he's like, let your guest get an edge.
Yeah, no, that can happen, and it can derail quickly.
Well, and what I do is, a lot of times I do what I call a me too. Somebody will say, you can make a really successful podcast without a large audience. Say that's one of my guests, and I'll go, oh man, let me talk about Special Mouse, and I'll talk about this super niche thing. I will cut that out, because the guest already made the point. I don't need to hit it home again. But because it's a conversation, I will definitely have the conversation. I just cut it out. So, but
yeah, good. Hey, as you're playing the music, let's just remind folks, it's tax season. It's tax season here in the United States. If you're a podcaster, you do have to file for your taxes. So make sure I'm stacking up. I've stacked up all my stuff, getting ready to file here in the next couple days.
Yes. That's one of the things I'm looking forward to in March. That's when I'm like, because I'm traveling all this. I'm like, you know what? We're just not gonna. I got all the paperwork. It's stacking in. About every other day I get a 1099 from somebody, and I'm like, oh yeah, well here's another one that
at a time for some people. Other people just block out 4 hours and get it done.
That's what I do. I get all my stuff together, and I pull off the Band-Aid and go, oof, do we have that? Do I have that in the bank? Ugh. So yeah.
Yeah, Chris. Sorry, Chris. I didn't mean to bring the vibe. just PSA. Just I care about you guys, so make sure you're getting your taxes done.
Yeah, absolutely. Jim, what's coming up on the AverageGuy.tv?
Yeah, so Mike Wieger, my co-host, just built a new gaming rig, and he was a Mac guy who's now converted to Windows. I know, crazy talk. We also talk about this crazy toilet paper robot. So join us over. I said.
Did you say toilet paper robot?
I did. Think of a Roomba for toilet paper. Dave, what happens if you're in the bathroom?
I live alone, man. I need a toilet paper robot.
So you open up because it's in the cabinet, right? And you open up and that is empty. What do? You invoke your toilet paper robot. TheAverageGuy.tv.
I'm sucked in. I'm listening. On the School of Podcasting, you will hear my interview with Eric Newsom, who worked for NPR, who worked for Audible, and the author of the book Make Noise. A couple really, really good points in this. And I'm going to share one when we go into post show that since we're talking about interviews and stuff. But speaking of the post show, thank you to the chat room. Thank you to our awesome supporters. AskThePodcastCoach.com/awesome. And stick around for that lovely post show. We need like post show music. Welcome to the post show.
We should ask listeners to submit ideas for that. That'd be awesome.
I started to write a jingle for Podfest. They had a jingle contest, and I could not find my drum machine. I have a drum machine in this apartment somewhere. No, here's the question that he has in his book that I was like, oh, that's good. So he goes, when you
this, which book?
Oh, the book is Make Noise. Thank you. Okay. Make Noise. Creator's Guide to Podcasting and Great Audio Storytelling, by Eric Newsom of the hit podcast TED Radio Hour, Invisibilia, and Where Should We Begin? So this is a guy that makes podcasts that get millions of downloads. And his thing was, he goes, when you have a guest on, you should stop and think, what's the one thing that I can ask that I can only ask this person? Like, what's the one thing that only that person can answer? So my answer was, how do you get hired at NPR? Because I said, okay, I got Eric Newsom on. What should I ask this guy? And he didn't really answer the question, because I was like, did you just put in an application? Like, how does it work? He had a story, which was cool. But because I'm like, it seems like, if you're on NPR, WNYC, whatever it is, you have all these players that are in quote media, and even Serial. If you look at Serial was launched by This American Life. And it's like, it seems like all the big people promote all the big people.
Yeah, it's always been that way.
And if you're, and I don't blame them. Like if I knew, somebody, and hey, I know, Janet over at whatever. Hey, can you write a story about my podcast? I would pull in all your network, and you'd be stupid not to use your network. My question is, how do you get in that network? I don't know that he really answered that question.
Yeah, you got to know people. I mean, it's a little like anything, right? You just got to be in the space. If you started hanging out with NPR people on a regular basis, right, showing up at their parties, going to their events, getting to know them, that you'd be surprised at how, because it's top of mind, right? Somebody is like, oh, wait a minute, an idea is pitched, and somebody goes, well, why don't we ask Dave Jackson to do that? Like, that's how those things happen.
That's how it works. All right, we're talking last night on the Podcasters Roundtable, different ways, like how do you discover podcasts? And we brought up the idea of podcast promos. And I said, back in the day, everybody had a 30-second promo. It was on your website. It was easy to share. And now they're just called trailers.
Right.
And I go, and my question is, why don't we swap trailers? Like, why? How did that? I don't know why it went out of vogue, unless people just started to get weird and like, oh, I don't want to promote my competition or
I don't
what?
think they're very effective, just to be honest. I
Yeah.
think it's way more effective if you get a podcaster talking about another podcast in their podcast. So as an example, I mention School of Podcasting all the time here. It's not my show, it's yours. But when I say it, people, now it's probably a bad example because almost everybody here probably listens to both. Let me give you another example. On Home Gadget Geeks, I referenced there's a show called Entertainment 2.0 that is a really good podcast about home entertainment systems and gaming. It's one I like and I listen to a lot. I think I've mentioned here Think Like a Hacker from WordFence and said, like, man, Dave, if you're not listening to that, they have little clues and hints and tricks about what's going on WordPress, just not with their plugin, but in WordPress in general. They came on the other day and they said, hey, there's 3 vulnerabilities in WordPress right now you need to be aware of, right? That's super helpful. All right. Yeah. Now I just said that on this show. People listening are like, oh, maybe I should go listen to Think Like a Hacker, or maybe I should go listen to Entertainment 2.0. That works better on Home Gadget Geeks. But I think those personal, those I just did a trailer. I think those are way more impactful than.
That's a good point.
Then hey,
it's word of mouth versus an ad.
Let's cut over to Dave going, hey, come over and listen to School of Podcasting. I just don't know. I think they're okay. I just think it's the difference between a host read ad and a produced ad. And I just don't think the produced ads, as soon as I hear a produced ad, I go 30. Like, we're done.
Yeah. See, this is what Fred says. Does that mean I'm going to be bringing back the podcast promo show? I had a podcast promo show. The reason that particular promo, because again, back in the day, Brett's saying that's how I found podcasts was to listen to Adam Curry and he played promos. Oh, well, okay. I had a podcast promo show because there were so many promos, and you hit the nail on the head. The promos were awful.
Yeah.
They were
generally they're terrible.
It was a lot of times it was like, they'd start playing music, and then it's like, then they'd have a bunch of clips. Hey, it's the, 3 Guys, 1 Brain show. And then it's like, hey man, remember that Orange Crush? Yeah. And then Steve's going to be doing this later. And you're like, okay, I don't know what any of that means. It's all out of context and stuff like that. Well, that's actually, I think, going to be a future episode of the School of Podcasting is the art of the tease.
Yeah.
Because a lot of podcasts love to start off the episode with a clip, and the clip doesn't really make me want to listen to the rest of the episode. I'm confused now. It's like the guy's like, and I was walking along and it was a very long road. And that's the clip. You're like, that makes me want to listen. No, I don't really care about the road. I understand this guy's on a journey, but like, what are the stakes?
Well, I think it's the difference between I see YouTubers doing this all the time, and it kind of drives me crazy, but that's just me. Okay. When they say this episode's sponsored by, and I know why they do it, because they want to be very, very clear. They took product or money for this, right? I prefer, at least for me personally, to start out by saying, hey, like say I'm doing this on Home Gadget Geeks and I have Mike. I said, hey, Mike, so-and-so company just sent me a such and such, or and it's opposed to starting it off like a commercial. This episode sponsored by. Right. I think I would rather build that into the presentation itself and make that a little smoother than just the whole sponsored thing. And then also it takes you out of the, sometimes these promos take you out of the vibe. That's not, what's the right word? They take you out of the flow. There we go. They take you out of the flow of the podcast, and it just seems kind of weird. I have been watching, so Ed Sullivan, who's a listener here and on a Home Gadget Geeks, he's producing, he's going to be live today on Cigar Authority, and they do, I think, 3 5-minute commercial breaks. I think we're talking about this maybe on School Podcasting.
Yeah.
No apologies. They just do it. They have people fighting for those spots. I kind of wonder sometimes, okay, I might be contradicting myself, but I think sometimes we worry too much about that. These guys are like Dave over there at Cigar Authority. He's like, go ahead, quit. I've got people who will pay more for the spot.
That's it. Yeah.
And so
Kyle says, yeah, that's the stuff. That's me. When I listen to the feed, I love Elsie to death, but I look at it and look for the link that says talk with Rob, Bink, and that's where I go. And then Daniel says, I think there was an app recently announced that only has podcast trailers. So I'll have to check into that. That would be interesting.
There could be exceptions to this, by the way. I'm not the authority on this. I'm just telling you, this is my opinion.
Well, here's the other thing too. I'm wondering if this is my phone. And what I mean by that is, remember how I keep trying to bring the phone back to this podcast?
Yeah.
And it's like, you know what? The audience doesn't really want to use the phone, Dave. It's nice. And so there's part of me that's like, hey, it used to be fun. Maybe it was just, it just made it feel like much more of a community that we're all helping each other. But on the other hand, it's like you said, if they're not effective, I mean, Ross says podcast promos are best used on social media.
Your own social media.
Yeah.
Your own. Yeah.
And then let your fans share them.
Yeah.
That's where they're really powerful.
Yeah. You're right. I think you're right there.
And but I mean, I pop in and out of Better Podcasting with Steven and SP. And at the beginning, it's always like, I'm Steve Dusseldorf of the, whatever, blah, blah, blah podcast where I talk about such as. I've never once gone. Now, number one, they're all very geeky. That's the whole, it's Gunna Geek Network. Yeah, and so I'm not their audience, but I've never even heard one that I was like, oh, I want to go listen to that. So, but I think the biggest problem there is I'm not that geeky. So
I promo HelloFresh at the end, and not as much lately, but I've been doing it more at the end of Home Gadget Geeks. And for a while, I was super consistent with it, probably 6 months. And people are asking me like, are they sponsoring you? And I'm like, no, I would have said if they were sponsoring me, but and I did it at the very end of the show. And Dave, it was kind of the most like talked about, like if I would miss it, I would get comments. People would be like, hey, where was the HelloFresh ad? Like, why are you not talking about the things you're eating? And that was at the end of the show. It could have been a commercial.
Do you have an affiliate link?
No. Well, I do. Yeah. Oh yeah.
I was going to say, you got to be doing something.
Yeah,
I'm like,
but here's the deal. I have the free, like, this is, I think how we underestimate listeners sometimes. So I have the free, hey, you can get a whole week for free. I'll give you the code. I don't make any money off of it. It's just try it. It's free. No. My listeners wanted to make sure I was making something. They're like, okay, well, I don't want to just like, can I do something where you benefit too? And I have a $40, there's like $40 off and I make 20 or something like that. So it's interesting. I think sometimes too, we underestimate how much our audience wants to partner with us on some of these things. And we try to give maybe too much away for free. And when they could partner, somebody said, I heard a Patreon guru say, kill your $1 plans.
Yes.
Start at $5. Like that. Don't set the expectation right away that's your lowest. Well, that's your lowest.
The other thing I've heard is if you don't want to start at $5, at least start at $2, because anybody that will give you $1 will give you $2.
Probably.
And you've doubled your income.
Yeah.
Covert Nerd says, Critical Role, that podcast does some entertaining ads. My favorite story was from Ray Ortega, who was on tour with is it Pod Save America?
I think so.
And they were doing a live podcast. And so they're like, hey, it's a live podcast. We're not sure if we're going to release these. We're not doing ads because, well, you've already paid to be here. And the audience was like, come on, man, do Blue Apron. Come on. Because they do really entertaining ads. Like they were calling out, come on, do, Casper mattress, whatever. And it's
the ad becomes something funny. It becomes a part of the program. And, I would always, with HelloFresh, I'd always talk about the 2 meals we had and how I enjoyed cooking them and some things. We even did, this is so bizarre. We even did a HelloFresh Pampered Chef kind of crossover. So I contacted a Pampered Chef person and said, hey, I want to do a podcast party where my listeners can virtually take part in a party and order things on Pampered Chef. And then I'll talk about some of those things as part of my HelloFresh again at the end of the episode. Like this is an hour and 15 minutes in. It's a 5-minute ad at the very end. Not really an ad, but more experience driven. And that seemed to work because they love here it is, a bunch of guys, like, oh no, I have that knife too. Or yeah, we bought that same thing, and you're like, okay, well, so maybe the stereotypes don't hold true. And this could be a very viable segment in the show. I've often thought about, we have a cooking tech, we do cooking tech on the show from time to time. Yeah. Maybe that needs to be a regular segment. We all have to eat. Right.
That is true.
And we need toilet paper. So just saying.
Yes, absolutely.
Toilet paper robots.
Daniel said that the Patreon said in
I
2019.
think that's where I heard it. Yeah.
Yeah, start at 5, and then I think, is this Craig? I believe so.
It is. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The $5 or $2 minimum for the U.S. market. No way patrons can afford that in Spain or other countries. That's true. So
Yeah, it does get it does get a little dicey when you get outside the United States or Canada.
Any tips on being interviewed, but on camera as well? Feel free to obsess over your background. Don't put a TV in the background. I will tell you that. That's a bad idea.
Front lighting, not back.
Yeah. I'm being interviewed today. Be my second time as a guest. Go over and listen if you can to an episode. In the same way that I research a guest, I research if I'm the guest, just to kind of see what the vibe is and things like that. I was on the radio this week. If you're a patron, you heard that. I sent that out, and I was so happy I did a little research because I went over and saw that they were on 91.3.FM in San Francisco, and it was cool because I got to drop that in there to make it sound like I knew what I was doing, even though I've never listened to whatever it was. But
how'd that go?
Interesting, because she comes on and she said, well, good. Carrie said, I already did that. So
Good.
she's done her homework.
Carrie, you're ready, by the way. You're
Yeah.
pretty good. You're pretty good at what you do.
Oh, and
Just get on
they
there
also
and do
sent me the topics. The thing with that, don't rehearse too much your topics,
Yeah.
because you don't want to go, oh, I'm so glad you asked me that question. It's, I've got it memorized and I can tell it like it's, yeah. So that's
in the morning, just in the shower before the day of the interview, I practice not saying in my mind, I do this, maybe even a little bit out loud, but I kind of practice the interview a little bit and then I forget it. And it's not, I think it's helpful to have some things ready to say, but then forget it. And just go as natural as you can. Just be you. You'll be great. You're awesome. So,
and I would be ready with your story. And also, because they're gonna ask you, tell us a little bit about yourself. Hopefully not, but they might. So that's where you don't start off with, well, I was born in whatever. That's where you go, oh, I got into photography or whatever the heck they brought you on. And also, if they don't tell you, ask, like, who am I talking? Like I always say, who am I talking to? Who's my target audience? Who's listening? Do they want how geeky can I get? Are we going overview somewhat, or are we going deep in the weeds? Like how? I always want, because the better idea, the clearer the picture I have of who I'm talking to, the better content I can give. And in theory, they should give that to you, but if they don't, ask. So
watch your host, because you're on video. Watch your host for social cues like you would in a regular conversation. So as you're talking, if they get distracted, keep going. If they're attentive, I think especially early in the conversation, keep your answers as short as you can. You don't want to just be like yes or no, but don't go 5 minutes for the first question. Like keep them short, let them pull things out of you, and maybe even give them in what you're saying some questions for them to ask. Like it goes back to what we talked about in the show. Don't give it all away in your first paragraph. Like just hold some back for the interview. Let them be inquisitive. Let them pull some of that out of you. It's just as important that you support them on their interview of you as the things you say. You want to make them look good as an interviewer. You never want to embarrass your interviewer, right? You don't want to make them look bad. So you never want to say things like, well, when you asked me this the last time, like, okay, don't do that, even if they have. And don't say, well, the last time you asked me this question, like that's just rude. Don't,
as I said previously.
Exactly. Yeah. Don't say, as we said before, don't say those things, right? Don't embarrass them. They're doing everything they can, and they've invited you to their program. Don't do that. So,
and then the other thing, be sure to let them know you're willing to promote, because that makes you a super guest. So, Mr. Naughty Bits is waiting to come in. So,
bring him in.
Yes, Mr.
Bring him
Naughty
in.
Bits. So
Hi, Dave. Are you there?
How are you?
We are
here.
One quick thing. When you were regarding Bring On the Blue Apron at a live event, I wanted to point out that's not always a great idea. One of the biggest political podcasters out there, Ben Shapiro, was at a live event. I think he was at the March for Life last year, and he did his podcast live at one of their events. And he did his sponsored ads, and he also did some other comments. I think he went down the thought experiment. If you could go back in time and kill baby Hitler and tied that into the March for Life, and being a conservative Jew,
that may not be
get
appropriate.
away with it. And he lost a lot of advertisers after people came for him.
Yeah. I think you're 100% right. In those situations, and the bigger you are, I think the more careful you have to be around those. I mean, the chances that HelloFresh is even knowing that I do what I do with HelloFresh, pretty small. Like, I don't think that's going to be an issue, but certainly if you're big media, you really got to be careful, and you really have to understand. During the football playoffs, I saw this all the time. Man, that ad placement on those, on all that is so intense. So I think Patrick Mahomes gets up on the platform, and a guy in a suit walks up next to him and puts down a bottle of Gatorade next to him and then walks away. And you're like, that wasn't for his thirst,
No.
and those guys have to be really, really careful about what they say. So Bangs, I think you're 100% right. Like, I do think you have to really think through, and depending upon your relationships with those organizations or those companies or who's paying you. Yeah. And the baby Hitler comments, it's probably never wise to say anything about Hitler in public. Let's just be honest. Right.
Very likely.
Yeah.
It was just, he lost a lot of advertisements, and he's one of the larger groups out there. And I think it actually damaged him.
Yeah.
And considering the year, he might not be able to get away with this. MailChimp, for example, kicked somebody off of their service because of their politics recently.
That's interesting.
No, you cannot email through us anymore.
Yeah,
because somebody went after.
Their. So I don't know if it was me or somebody flagged me. You cannot link to the schoolofpodcasting.com from Facebook right now. You can't. It'll say yada 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 does not follow our guidelines. And I've gone over my favorite one because they send you a link, and I went to it, and one of the things that was flagged as spam was me saying I'm the moderator of the School of Podcasting private Facebook group. And I said, hey, everybody, if you've been emailing Dave at schoolofpodcasting.com, I recently switched my web hosting and I forgot to connect my email. So I'm sorry, it's working now. So if you've emailed me over the last couple of days, please send the email again. That got flagged as spam. And I'm like, and I've gone through and I've reviewed, and they say that when you get flagged, it could last up to a month. And I'm like, but I've gotten zero response from them in terms of like, the one was, it was in a podcast movement group, and somebody asked, should I start a podcast network? And I thought about it, and that's the problem right there. I thought maybe I shouldn't do this, but I linked to my episode because it wasn't just me. It was Daniel and Glenn and all these other people talking about, no, you probably shouldn't start a network. But I was promoting my own episode, and that got flagged as spam. And I was like, but the thing that sucks is I got a fair amount of traffic from Facebook, and now you can't link to this. I have to go to Bitly, make a Bitly link, and put it in my post on Facebook to be able to promote my own stuff. So I don't know if I did. I think it might have been. And my whole thing is like, how many strikes do you get before you get flagged on this thing? So
there are a lot of services that get nuked like that automatically with a soft ban on Reddit, for example. I refer people to Spreaker Studio for the people that try to do 3 USB mics at once and otherwise don't listen to me, that it's a road of pain, agony, and suffering. And it gets knocked out every time, and I have to myself unspam my own comments in my own subreddit, which is always funny. Daniel says I probably have a hater. I probably do.
Oh, that's funny.
Somebody funny. Some Anchor lover out there going, quit talking bad about Anchor.
None of this stuff is perfect, and none of these systems are perfect. You just kind of have to figure out what your, bangs to what you initially started with. When you get larger, bigger, more influential, you're held to a different standard and different set of rules. And it is what it is, right or wrong. It kind of is what it is.
You take care.
Yeah. Thanks, Banks. Thanks for jumping in. It's a good point, by the way. His point is really good. Be careful what you wish for, and the more influential you get, the higher accountability you have publicly. And that accountability is not always like fun.
Well, when you talk about being big, I just watched this documentary on Taylor Swift. It's called Americana, and she says it's interesting. She goes that if you purposely don't talk about these things and you think about it, she goes, so that way you're not getting in trouble. You're not doing anything wrong. So if you really, watch your step to make sure you don't do anything wrong, you then get labeled as calculating.
Yeah. You never do anything.
Yeah. And it's and it was a case of like, you're kind of damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And I was like, wow, that is true. You're kind of screwed. If you take the steps to make sure you don't get in trouble, you then get in trouble for not getting in trouble.
Yeah. No. Right. And I think you're plain. It's just kind of like, if you're always trying to cover yourself so you don't offend anybody, that is, oh my gosh, the two examples that come into mind there. One, while we were doing this live series this week, we got hundreds of people out there. One of the hosts said, had a phrase that was fairly, I wouldn't call it racist, but it was kind of offensive. Like, if you knew, and immediately there was kind of an outcry in the chat room of this. So, at some point I said, hey guys, I'll take care of this behind the scenes. Like, just let's focus on what we're trying to do here. And so you get some of that, right? You may say something and you don't mean it. It could have been a phrase that 30 years ago was okay. It wasn't really okay then, but maybe we said it. Now we say it now and we get busted for it. Right. So there's that kind of deal. And I think even my own example with cigars, where I've kind of gotten into them recently and I got some negative feedback on it from my audience. They were kind of like, we didn't really sign on for cigars. Like that's not a thing. And so I've been really careful to remove it from the live show or from the regular show. When
I talked to Dave in Boston, he said 1 out of 1,000 people smoke cigars. So it's a niche audience. And
it's definitely, and it's got some, it has some negative. I mean, there are people who and rightly so, who say, hey, that's not the healthiest thing to do in the world. And you're right. It's not, but neither is drinking soda. And there's no Surgeon General warning on Coke, which there probably should be. Yeah. Especially Diet Coke. Like Diet Coke's a chemical mix of crap for you.
Of stuff. That's it. My favorite is, I always love, there was a thing because they're going to switch up Coke Zero. And I'm like, really? It works. Coke takes a product that people like, they mess it up, and then they're going to go back. I guarantee they're going to go back to it. So they're going to go Coke Zero Sugar. And they have a, And so my favorite is it shows where there's no salt, there's no sugar, and there's no fat. There's no fat in Coke. I'm like, really? There's no fat in Coke? Thanks.
Oh, well,
but
calories. But
I forgot. But that's the whole thing. There are calories in it, and then I'm like, it's just a bunch of chemicals. It's like, it's Mr. White from Breaking Bad come up with something that's brown to drink. I'm like, so. But I worked in a grocery store during the new Coke phase, man. I was on the front lines of that.
What a disaster that was. Well, and it's funny, like now it's getting more popular to have those products with cane sugar because that's more natural than some of Well, we moved away from that because of the effects of it. So it's just funny. Public opinion is what we're really talking about here. And it's hard to predict and it's hard to know. I mentioned, I think in this regular show, this coronavirus, is going around, and now it's popular enough that there's debate. I see all these like, hey guys, let's keep this in perspective that we have 1,000 times more people die of the flu each year than it looks like it's going to be this. And we don't shut down airports, regardless of where you fall into that. There's this debate going on. Are we overreacting? Are we underreacting? Well, man, once you get into the public spotlight and you have to deal with public scrutiny, and the bigger your audiences get, the more that comes in. Man, be careful what you wish for. Like I like that 500 an episode download number because I think it's an engaged audience that's not going to necessarily go rogue on you.
Yeah, that's true. It'll be interesting to see. And again, I'm not a huge Taylor Swift fan, but it shows at the end where she actually starts voicing her opinion.
Yeah.
And the thing I kind of loved, at one point, she voiced her opinion and thought she could do some change. and then didn't. And it was like, yeah, maybe you're not quite so popular after all.
Or it wasn't ready, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you got to applaud what she's doing. She is really brought up some bad things in the system, and you got to. Here's the deal. Sometimes I come across as a guy who says, and I said this to Bangs just a few minutes ago, well, kind of is what it is.
Yeah.
We can't live in a world where everybody is saying it is what it is. We need activists. We need people who will come out and say, hey, this happened to me. This is wrong. And we need to make a big deal about this. So that tension needs to exist. And sometimes that needs to happen in a podcast, right? People need to say these things. I mean, if Edward Snowden hadn't come out and done what he did,
man,
like where would we be today if that hadn't been?
Did you hear where Facebook got flagged again for sharing information that they got from your photos? And I was like, and they got fined again. It was on, I was watching Headline News, and that happened to come on it. And Robin Meade is like, you're not going to believe this. Facebook got fined again for privacy. And I was like, no, I can believe that perfectly. That's not hard to believe at all. And the fact that nobody cares. And so when everybody's doing those 10, I think it was you that said the whole 10-year challenge is just to see if it can test their face recognition.
Sure.
And shocking, that's what part of it was. And I was like, yeah, Jim called that one.
You're validating for Facebook. This is me 10 years ago. This is me now. Hey, why wouldn't I then grab those and build an algorithm around how people's faces change over 10 years?
And my favorite line was I was watching Samantha Bee, I forget the name of her show, Full Frontal on TBS, and she was playing a clip from Zuckerberg was talking about something, and he was talking about somebody he talked to at a dinner party, and he goes, but it was a dinner party, so it's kind of a private conversation. And she goes, oh yeah, let's let the guy from Facebook keep his privacy.
Do you think he has the Facebook microphone turned on his phone? Do you think, like, because we know, right? Every Facebook's listening to everything we say, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they are. If you don't have that microphone disabled on the app on your phone, they are listening to you for sure, right? Do you think he's got that turned on? Probably not.
Probably not. So.
not even with his own company. Somebody said in the chat room, Mystic Mac 413, Dave, Jackson, Ray, Daniel. Oh no, that's not the one I wanted to read. Jim, you're a big boy. If you want to smoke, go ahead. It's your life. It is, except my podcast life, I have volunteered to share with my listeners. And so, by the way, I totally agree with you, and thanks for that comment. I will continue to do what I want to do. But that being said, I do share this space with my listeners, and I think it's really kind of key. Okay, I don't have to do that. Doesn't mean I have to stop doing it. They can't shame me. I got environmentally shamed on a podcast I was doing for work. I had a reusable cup. Everybody will be happy. This is a reusable cup. I use it. I can wash it, right? Mm-hmm. I had a paper cup, which is not reusable. And somebody in the chat room said, Jim, are you kidding me? That's a non-reusable cup. Do you know what you're doing to the environment? Like, I'm ashamed of you. I got environmentally shamed on a podcast. This is a guy who drives a hybrid car. This is a guy who mows his lawn nearly completely organic, or fertilizes his lawn. Yeah. And I was getting environmentally shamed. Okay, it happens.
I'm confused because I thought we switched to plastic bags because, trees, paper, the whole 9 yards. And there's a thing, they put up a thing in where I live in our allotment, there's a centralized laundry. And I go in, it's like, hey, if you want to start recycling, because we don't, there's a thing like a block and a half that way, blah, blah, blah. Please keep in mind, all plastic bags are not recyclable. And I was like, wait, what? Yeah. I'm like, and I was like, what? Why are we using? Because I don't know about you. I could if I bought business cards, each one of these would get a bag. I end up with 57 bags. And I'm like, when I was a grocery bagger, this would have been in 2 bags. They'd weigh about 20 pounds each. But it drives me nuts when I go to the store. And I'm like, why are we using?
We're going to ban. In the United States, we're going to ban, in a lot of places it's already banned. We're going to ban plastic bags altogether. And a lot of disposal, a lot of the plastic we have today is going to get banned.
Well, now there's a thing when I go to the grocery store, they go, how many reusable bags did you bring? And I think I get a discount.
Yeah.
If I bring.
That's a great incentive.
Yeah.
It's we're going to start, it's a lot of even the reusable bags we're using are plastic fibered. Nice. So okay, we probably need to get better at creating hemp based or fiber, a better natural fiber that actually breaks down. in that. But I think that's the right incentive, by the way, is, hey, when you come, you get a discount. Otherwise, I mean, as humans, we're based on incentives. We need those kinds of things. If I got a nickel or a dime off, if I brought my own bags, you better believe when I get out of the car, I'm thinking, oh, let me grab my bags as I'm going in. Now, I was in Target just yesterday buying a bunch of stuff, and I didn't bring a bag in, and I didn't want one of their bags. So I just stacked everything up on the big box and just carried it out. Like, well, I don't necessarily have to have a bag for this thing. So
yeah, they used to have a store here where people would bring in boxes, and you would just grab a box and put it in the cart, and then you would, unbox it and then rebox it and take it out to the car. It was kind of a interesting things. Craig says nuclear weapons and big business, industrial waste, and we're supposed to sit at home with reusable bags. That's it.
Well, no, there's always hypocrisy.
Always
Hypocrisy.
Yeah.
There's just, by the way, the current trash problem that we have on our oceans, it's not caused by bottles washing themselves out into the ocean. Like for 5 years, we shipped things to China for recycle. Sometimes China wouldn't take it. Where do you think those plastics would go?
Yeah.
Off the side of the boat, right? They just would dump. They would just dump. They couldn't, there were some problems in getting it and it wasn't worth it, but we collected it. What do you do with it? Well, oops.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes we think damn, what are those people in LA doing? Why are they washing all their plastic bottles into well, that's not the problem. The problem is the industrial, to this point, right? We had an industrial issue where they were just dumping, you ever seen it at a Walmart, those big cubes of cardboard? Well, that's what our recycling centers do. I mean, I think a lot of people think when they recycle that the recycle gets, I recycle it. It goes from my trash to the car. It goes to the recycling center here in Omaha. And then in Omaha recycles it. It's sold. It's sold to somebody who will recycle it. That transaction doesn't always work, and there's not always buyers. Well, then what do you do with it, Dave? You take it to the landfill.
Yeah.
It's not, recycling is not as clean of a business as people think it is. And so anyways, sorry to get all political on that,
well,
but that's
all right.
That's one of those areas where it's a little bit of hypocrisy and we get blamed for a freaking plastic bag.
Yeah. And Bangs, one last point here. Paper straws are a step too far, though. Yeah, I agree.
We did go too far.
Yeah.
Too soon and too far.
Yeah. So we will be back on the 29th?
I think so. Yeah. This will be the longest break we've ever taken.
Which will be my official 4-year anniversary at Libsyn.
Oh, it's been 4 years already?
Yeah. I was hired on February 29th.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I got to double check that because I want to say 3.
4?
It feels like 3, but I think it's 4.
Okay.
I think it was 2016.
Oh, man, what a blur!
Yeah,
what
very
a
much so.
Freaking blur! Wow.
So we will be back.
Right,
at the
safe
end
travels,
of the month.
my friend. Safe travels. You're gonna be putting a lot of miles in there. Get a mask.
Yeah, actually,
that's the thing right now. Everybody's wearing masks.
I might do that.
Planes. You might. Yeah. You might want to. I don't know. Maybe a good practice, anyways. It's bad. It's bad.
Well, the other thing is, you just with so many. Every time I get on a plane, I feel like I dodge a bullet if I'm not sick by the time I get home. So it's not.
Anyway. Well, I kind of think sometimes I just think our bodies were built to repel all those things,
right?
And the stronger our immune systems,
it's true.
So I just go around. I lick doorknob.
Nice.
All right.
All right, everybody. We'll see you.
We'll see you in a couple weeks.
All right. Take care.